Hi, so today in ecology we are going to discuss population interactions. So as we know that population basically means the number of individuals of a particular species living in a given area at any given time. Within an ecosystem there will be multiple populations living and they will interact with each other. Some of those interactions are neutral, that is these two populations can coexist together without causing any harm or benefit to each other. Those are neutral interactions. Today we will be focusing on something known as negative interaction. So a kind of interaction in which one population will benefit but the other will get harmed. So there will be harm happening to any one of these or both of these populations, right? So starting with negative interactions, the first is competition. In competition, both the species is negatively impacted. How? So there is a principle called the Gauss's exclusion principle, which basically says that if two organisms occupy the same niche, then there is going to be a competitive reaction between them. This competition or this interspecific competition can either lead to the elimination of one species or the separation of the two biological niches. So if two organisms, let's say there are two organisms living on the continental shelf of oceans, okay, both of them feed on the same kind of organisms and they live at the same place, they have the same niche, okay. Therefore there is going to be competition for resources between these two organisms, and then to be able to survive, either one of these species is going to completely overpower the other, they will become extinct, or these two species will decide two different or shift to two different niches. So one will feed on something else, the other will feed on something else. A very good example would be to think of a tree. If the tree is our ecosystem, if all birds and insects living on that tree feed on the fruit of that tree, obviously there will not be enough food for all of them, right? So in that case what can happen is that either the birds, certain species of bird will win competitively and all other animals will perish, or what realistically happens is that each animal or each species develops a special kind of modification so that some will feed on the leaves, some will feed on the fruit, some on the seed, right? And therefore the moment the niche diversifies, competition ends. So Gauss's exclusion principle states that if two species live within the same ecological niche, then there is going to be a competitive reaction because of which either one of the species will cease to exist or both the species will redevelop a new niche, okay. Moving on, we have predation. Now this is this is the fundamental law that keeps ecosystems going, and that's your food web and food chain. Every organism is a prey to its predator and a predator to its prey, right? So it sounds very confusing to hear. So what it basically means is that, so if you look at the food web, grass is the prey for any herbivore, which can be preyed on by carnivores. These carnivores can be preyed on by tertiary carnivores. Right? And then finally all of them will be decomposed by decomposers. So this relationship of eating and getting eaten is basically what predation is all about. The one that is getting eaten is called the prey. The one that eats is the predator. Shikar or shikari, right? So now obviously this is the basic 10% law that we can discuss in detail in the next few videos when we deal with ecology in detail. Now, however, in an ecosystem, finding a food chain is not possible. Food chains are not ideal. I mean, they are ideal, they are not real. So what happens is they have food webs. So grass is not eaten by one herbivore but multiple herbivores. One herbivore is eaten by multiple carnivores. They can also be eaten by tertiary carnivores. So there is a web-like structure which goes on because a food chain is not usually sustainable within an ecosystem. Moving on, we have parasitism. Again, a term that we are very common, commonly we use. We are very used to this term, right? So in parasitism, obviously the parasite is positively affected, whereas the host is negatively affected, correct? So the organism, it's a kind of interaction when one organism lives inside or outside the system of another organism and derives nutrition from that organism, okay, while causing harm. Now, classification of parasites is something that we will try to understand today. Ecto and endoparasite. So ecto means outside. So think about leeches, lice, mites, fleas, all of these parasites, mosquitoes. There are ectoparasites. They live outside our system, mammals or insects or whatever. It lives outside the system and it takes nutrition. That's ectoparasite. Endo is what lives inside. So all kinds of worms, liver fluke, tapeworm, so ascaris, all of these are your endoparasites. Now endoparasites can also be cellular parasites, right? So cellular parasites then, a good example would be Plasmodium, malarial parasite. It lives inside your RBCs. So that's a cellular parasite. Facultative versus obligatory. Facultative parasites are they always depend completely on parasitism, okay? Whereas obligatory parasites become parasites in the absence of food. So facultative would be ascaris is a facultative parasite, whereas obligatory would be leech. It's an obligatory parasite, okay? Holo and hemi. Holo parasites are parasites that derive their entire nutrition from parasitism, whereas hemi derives its nutrition partial nutrition. So hemiparasites are usually found in phytoparasitism. So plant parasites can be hemiparasites. All animal parasites are holoparasites, okay? So for example, there are certain parasites in plants like mistletoe. They only derive certain part of the nutrition from the host, otherwise they are capable of doing photosynthesis. Yeah. Hyperparasite is a very interesting concept. This is when a parasite lives in the body of another parasite. So there is a bacteria which lives in the rat flea. So it's a parasite to a parasite, okay? Then it's a hyperparasite. So in a way you can call bacteriophages hyperparasites as well, because bacteria can work as parasites. Bacteriophages live in or harm bacteria. Therefore, bacteriophages can also work as hyperparasites. Brood parasitism is another very interesting concept which is found in birds. So, you know that cuckoos, they lay their eggs in the nests of the crows. And when these birds crow, the cuckoos fly away. So what basically happens in this case is that because they look so similar, the one species evades the task of paternal or parental upbringing. So taking care of the egg, feeding the hatchlings, all of that is done by a completely different species without even realizing. That is brood parasitism. Okay, a very important question when it comes to meat. The next topic, the last, is amensalism. In amensalism, one organism is negatively impacted, the other has zero effect on it. So in amensalism, what happens is that these organisms, they give out certain chemicals from their body which prevents the growth of other organisms around it. So for example, when penicillin was discovered, what was noticed that wherever Penicillium notatum, the fungus, was growing, Streptococcus couldn't grow, the bacteria couldn't grow. So whatever Penicillium was liberating or secreting prevented the growth of bacteria. So then that becomes an amensalism or amensal concept, right? Similarly, smoother crops, certain crops like sunflower, they are used because they prevent the growth of weeds. So that's a smoother crop. So it is an amensal to weeds. Similarly, black walnut, it releases a chemical known as the juglone, which prevents the growth of, which is toxic basically to many plants like apples, alfalfa, many plants, they can't grow. So that is the concept of amensalism. I hope this much was clear. In the next video, we will do positive interactions. Thank you.